little bit more on the painting itself. Do much like that the color study I did earlier today, which you may or may not have seen. I'm going to strengthen up the yellow a little bit on my bananas. I want more yellow, not to be confused with cowbell. But since I am going to want it sort of over everything here, I'm just going to sort of treat my bananas as one single unit, which might be a little bit tricky for you, but give it a try if you feel like. And while that's wet, I'm going to get my smaller number 4 round. I'm doing this fast, and you certainly, if it's all new to you, I would encourage you to not bite off too much. And doing 2 shapes like that can end up driving you a little crazy trying to manage where all the water is and where all the color is, and etc., etc. But that's a number 2. I'm going to get my number 4. I'm going to mix in a very little bit of my peacock blue with that Hansa yellow light. Make a greenish yellow color and just start dropping in. I know as I get down closer to the side, and nothing's coming out there, the side of the picture, the painting, that I want it to gradually get a little bit darker, which is mostly, it's not necessarily what the actual bananas are doing, but as a composition technique to make sure your eye stays that way. The eye wants to follow, is naturally drawn to areas of contrast, and there's all different kinds of contrast. Usually the most important in my mind is, in a lot of artists, is contrast of values. How light or dark something is next to something else, and how light or dark that something else is. I'm going to call that good for now, and then I'll let that dry and come back and do more. The other thing, let me do a little bit more on the grapes. I'm going to use my number 4 brush, and wanted to basically demonstrate kind of a couple different ways that you can apply color. Oh look, I took off the masking fluid on that one. I wonder why I did that. Oh well. Maybe I wanted to make sure. Oh, I think I know why. But either way, I'm not going to paint that right now. But when you want to get graduated color, what I hope I've demonstrated before, one way is to start with a light mixture of whatever the lighter color is, and starting with that and then adding darker color. One way is to just add water and then introduce a little bit of color. I'm going to bring in a little bit of quinacridone rose mixed with a tiny bit of ultramarine blue to make sort of a bluish violet is my goal. I'm sorry, a reddish violet. And try dropping it in. The tricky part about, one of the many tricky parts about watercolor is trying to get it to go just far enough, the color to go just far enough but not too far. And that has to do mostly just with how wet the paper is, how much paint you introduce. When I want more control, I use this much smaller brush. So that's one way. Another way that is a little bit faster, but it's not going to give you as much control, is to just paint a little bit of color where you want it, and then rinse out that color and come back in with a wet brush and blend out the edge. That can be trickier because some colors will stain, and it's also harder to control what part of that shape is watery and what part is not. I often end up using sort of a combination of both of these. A little more ultramarine blue. It's going to get darker down here as it keeps turning away from the light. Oh, that was a good example of even a maybe you already noticed that. I was painting, I had one wet shape, and I was painting a shape right next to it without letting it dry first. So it's not going to hold that edge. This is, once again, one of the things that can be great about watercolor, one of the things that can drive you a little crazy. And one of the reasons I, once again, build up gradually, because any goof up like that is going to be less of an issue the further I go. Let me see. How about a little bit more on the orange? I'm sort of looking at the colors now, making sure nothing next to that is wet. And indeed, I'm goofing it again because that part of the banana is still wet. How about the apple? This is how it goes. You can certainly stop and bust out the hairdryer. That can sometimes get old really fast. I don't know if that's the cleanest of water, but let's try it anyways. I've been sort of getting my app a little bit more of the naphthol red. Yeah, that's just not clean enough. Hold on a second. I think it was more the water in the palette than the water in my bucket here. But let's see. We started, you know, with a little bit of light orangey red, and this is a good example of, you know, that's just not thrilling me. I want to, oops, that was basically the same yellow, but I want to just get even a little bit stronger orangey red where that's next to the highlight. So that's the naphthol red. And I'm gonna, what are you gonna do, Farron? I think I'll start out with sort of a watery mix of that, and it will start strengthening that color overall. And then kind of transition to a little bit of a stronger mix. The stronger, I added a little bit more the naphthol red, so moving more towards more pure red as well as more concentrated red and darker. So you can tell I'm not even sort of worried about the darker shadows so much right now. Maybe while I am here, I'll start dropping in a bit of the cooler quinacridone red as well. So the top part of that is drying more than I wish it had. But let's see if I bring in even a little bit more of the orangey red. Yeah, it's a good example of now I'm introducing, it doesn't seem that terrible actually now that I look at it, but some color that is much wetter than the paper that it's being put on, so it won't dry as gradually. But actually it's looking okay. I want to make sure that I'm bringing in color at this edge and not water. Of course there has to be some water. I happen to grab the quinacridone rose at that point, which is fine. Mostly what's fun with all of these kinds of things is to sort of learn all the different kinds of hues that are in there. Mix them together with a certain amount of controlling where the what's light and what's dark, and having fun. This is still my number 4. I'm literally sort of pushing in some color there to see what happens. Not much, but that's okay. I can tell that this side of the apple is still very wet. If I'm careful, I could bring in a little bit of the violet as we keep getting darker towards the side of the apple. I'm going to be introducing this darker sort of brick red. That's pretty dark. Let's see what happens. It ultimately gets pretty darn dark. Pretty darn dark. One of the reasons I'm doing this now is that I'm much more, having done it for a lot longer, I know I have a much better sense of how things are going to dry and what's going to dry with edges that I don't want and what's going to dry with edges that I don't care, and how much I'll be able to adjust. But it's definitely a gradual building up. I know that I'm shifting from this, just once again like that study, from this lighter orangey red to a darker pure warm red to a cooler reds various places, and then to a really dark purpley red eventually. That'll be on a subsequent layer. If you keep holding the paper at an angle, you can tell where it's wet, still relatively wet, by how shiny the gloss factor. And as long as I introduce this color without too much additional water, and as long as I'm careful to introduce it in areas where it's not going to create a dramatic difference in how wet part of the paper is and how dry the other side is, it'll blend in pretty nicely. Okay, now I'm getting a little crazy. He's so crazy. Just a little bit darker violet. This is part of sort of knowing where you're going and knowing when you can take advantage of certain aspects. And also knowing when it's time to just let that shape be, let it dry. I'm going to call that fine. I know it's not a very gradual edge there, but I'll get there. Okay, I'm still painting. Okay.